Wouldn't you like to pause from your busy day and listen in to experts and homeschool parents like you about the beautiful world of homeschooling? This podcast is designed just for you. Each episode connects you to the best conversations that will give you courage and fill your cup so you can keep pouring into your family every single day. Introducing the Hey Mama Homeschool Show, brought to you by the Old Schoolhouse, your trusted homeschool partner for over 20 years.
Hi, welcome to episode 51 of the Hey Mama Homeschool Show podcast. I am today's host, Heather from the Old Schoolhouse, and today's topic is homesteading and self-sufficiency. That's right, I said homesteading and not homeschooling. Although this podcast does touch on all things homeschooling, we certainly cannot leave out homesteading or self-sufficiency for that matter out of the mix, and I'm going to explain why in a little bit. Throughout the episode, I am going to highlight three main topics. Number one, what homesteading and self-sufficiency are and what they are not. I'm also going to talk about three practical homesteading skills that you can incorporate into your homeschool this winter. And I will leave and finish off the podcast with three homeschool-friendly flowers that you need to teach your kids about right away. You'll even be able to plant them this spring, even if it's just on your windowsill at home. You are not going to want to miss these three incredible plants that are excellent to incorporate into your homeschool. Before I get into these topics, I would like to note that the highlights of what I share about today can be found in the show notes over at homeschoolshow.com. Under today's episode, be sure to check out homeschoolshow.com to find the show notes for every Hey Mama Homeschool Show episode. This is where you will find links to specific resources mentioned in each podcast. You will find relevant articles that you can enjoy in your own time. And you'll also find resources that are available on our curriculum site, schoolhouseteachers.com. And I also want to let you know that if you have not yet downloaded the app for the Old Schoolhouse magazine, you can find that over at homeschoolat.com. That's homeschoolapp.com. The winter issue of the Old Schoolhouse magazine is here. You can look inside this edition for homeschool fun and games, how to teach logic and strategy, and writing tips. You can take a break from the hustle and bustle of the busy season and snuggle up with hot chocolate in your hand and read this brand new edition from cover to uncover you to inspire you as you start off 2024 in your homeschool. So be sure to check that out. Again, that is homeschoolapp.com. Well, I am so excited as a homesteader myself. It has been 15 years this June. It'll be 15 years that my husband and I and 5 children have lived on 13 acres. And I laugh because I never thought this would be my life growing up. I grew up in the suburbs, homesteading. Living this lifestyle was not on my radar at all, but something changed when I became a Christian. And I do want to begin by saying that not every Christian needs to be a homesteader. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm going to link to an incredible article that Todd Wilson shared. He mentioned that sometimes women or families can sometimes feel guilted into homesteading. They feel that because they homeschool, they need to, and that should never be the case. Everybody has their own convictions, their own desires, and my hope and my goal is to share my experience and what I've learned with others, and maybe you can find something that you can grab onto that you might find would be relevant for your family, even if you just use it as a learning experience. I know for our family, we want to teach our children to be self-sufficient in case there is ever a situation where they would need to be, but also for education purposes, for educational reasons, to learn about the history of our country and what the pioneers had to experience. And it's fun for them. My children they've never complained about the experiences that we've given them. They've enjoyed it, and it's been a wonderful addition to our homeschool. So I just want to say homesteading is not equal to homeschooling, but a lot of homesteaders are homeschoolers and a lot of homeschoolers are homesteaders. So I am excited to talk about this topic. And I do want to mention that homesteading and self-sufficiency does not necessarily have to mean that we as homesteaders want to be completely self-sufficient in the sense that we're not God sufficient. And I think a lot of times people get turned off by the term self-sufficiency because they think that homesteaders are trying to do everything themselves. But I think when we study history, and I know for a lot of homeschoolers, we tend to be drawn to the beginning pioneer days, Little House on the Prairie times. There's a lot of draw to that time period. And I do want to focus on that time period because a lot of our history, people generally were self sufficient in the sense that they still had to trust God for the rain for their crops. We read a story that was written in the early 1900s in our homeschool recently about this girl named Remember Biddle. And the story was called The Soap Making of Remember Biddle. And I'm going to talk a little bit about soap making and how you can incorporate that into your homeschool in a little bit. But that story stuck out to me because of you have to have the materials and you still have to believe God for those materials in your hands. And there's another story in the book where there was this young boy who had nothing for Thanksgiving, and he had to believe God just for the gunpowder to be able to shoot turkeys for Thanksgiving dinner. So these children in these stories, they had to be sufficient in the sense that they had to trust God to provide the things that they needed, but they knew once they had those ashes, this 12-year-old girl in this story, she knew how to turn those ashes into lye so she could make soap. And this young boy knew that he needed to have powder to be able to get a turkey. So even these simple skills that when we grow up in America today, our children, I know I had no idea the processes of where everything came from on my dinner table or how soap was made or anything of the sort. So just going back to those basics, teaching our children where these things come from. So if they're in a situation where they would need to make soap or they would need to harvest their own food, I pray that that is not never the case. But if it were, they would know what to do. They would have confidence and they would be able to handle that situation. And as someone who grew up in the suburbs, having no understanding of that in any sense, when I did find myself in a third world situation, I realized how much I did not know and how much more those people knew. When I thought I was going in there to teach them something, they taught me so much more. And I believe that is where my desire and hope to raise my children the way that we are on a homestead was birthed. And I want to give a quick definition of what a homestead is and what it's not. Basically, it's important to differentiate homesteading from farming. When you think of farming, this is when you're driving down the highway and you see hundreds, possibly thousands of acres, beautiful fencing, hundreds of head of cattle, beautiful silos, huge red barns. That is a farm. What you're seeing are farms where the farmer most likely does not live. In some cases, they do, but they most likely do not live on the farm. It is owned by a company, owned by a business, owned by multiple people, and it is a business. Homesteading, although some homesteaders have been blessed with thousands of acres and they have production, and that is how they make their living. What I'm talking about today is more of a mindset. Every year I go to the Homesteaders of America conference. This is where over 6,000 homesteaders in America, all 50 states are represented, even Alaska and Hawaii. There are even people from outside of the country. I met people this past year, back in 2023, that flew in from Australia. You have homesteaders from all walks of life, from the urban homesteader that has not even an acre to people with hundreds or thousands of acres. So it really isn't necessarily about the amount, but it is about the mindset and is about providing for your family. And that is the general mindset of a homesteader, is to be able to have everything that you need on your plot of land, on your property, whatever it may look like. It doesn't have to look like the storybook farm. And a lot of new homesteaders getting started out, that is the biggest pitfall, the biggest trap, is they see the YouTube videos, they see the storybooks, and they think they have to have the fencing perfect, the barn beautifully painted with several coats of red paint to look the part. And I find a lot of times that is simply because there is there are people that do not approve of what they are doing, and they want to, and I was guilty of this. So maybe not everybody does this, but you feel like you have to fit into this role. But there is no role that you have to fit into if you are following God and trying to be God sufficient. And that's what I found over the past 15 years, that our homestead does not look like our next door neighbor's homestead. It does not look like our friends down the road. And that is completely okay. And I'm going to talk about why that is completely okay, and actually why that is 100% needed. So once we understand that homesteading is to provide for our family, we need to look at, what do we want our homestead to look like? We can read, watch videos, learn from others, and try to figure out what we want our homestead to look like. But we need to look at the needs of our family. When we first got started, of course, we wanted to have a milk cow. We wanted to have some source of milk because our daughter struggled with a lactose intolerance. And we had heard that by using fresh raw milk, the issue would not be there because of the antibiotics would not be present in the milk, and for different reasons. So that was why we started with goats and have progressed to having a dairy cow on our homestead for the health benefits. And we have gone to a place where we are able to make a small amount of income on our homestead, but the ultimate goal has been, and ultimately will be, to be able to provide for our family, of course, with the help of the Lord. Now, I want to highlight a few things that you can do on your homestead this winter. Homesteading is not only for the spring and summer months, although that is when everything is hopping and happening and everything is in bloom and things are busy. But the winter is an important time for the homestead as well. And if you have that desire to teach your children homesteading skills, you want to get into homesteading in a small way, here are three practical things that you can do this winter. The first one I mentioned earlier, that would be soap making. I don't know if you've heard this, but soap making, once you do it, it can be very addictive. And I didn't understand why until I did it myself. There are two main ways that you can make your own soap. The first one would be an oil-based soap. This is very expensive. This is what I started out with, and I don't recommend it unless you have a hard time getting the ingredients for the second one. With oil-based soap, you will need olive oil, coconut oil, and I can leave a recipe in the show notes, but you will need different types of oils. It is an excellent way to teach your children the importance of having just the right amount of ingredients for a certain process to happen. Because if you do not have the right proportions, then it will not set. Your soap will not, it'll be too oily, too greasy, and it will not work. But the second kind is the more old-fashioned kind and only calls for 3 ingredients. That's right, only 3 ingredients, and it hardens up much quicker. The first kind with the oil, it can take 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes longer for it to harden. If you use the second kind, which would be your lard-based soap, so you don't have to use pig fat like we use. We render our own pig fat, which would be your lard. You could also do tallow, which would be if you have any cattle, then you could use that. We actually use a mix, but it's predominantly from our pig. You would render that down. You would have your lard, or you can go to a butcher, you can go to a store, get a pound or 2 of lard, and all you would need is lard, water, and lye. Now, don't get scared. A lot of people get nervous about the lye because it is poisonous, but if you think about it, there are many poisonous things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, or even dangerous in the kitchen. You're not going to have your 2-year-old sitting right below you if you're frying up something in a pan with hot oil. I think any mom or dad listening to this podcast uses common sense in the kitchen, in their home, if you have a homestead on the homestead. And lye is no different. You just have to make sure you're wearing your gloves. You have to make sure you're following the protocol because, yes, it is caustic, but it is incredible. And every time we use it to make soap, I am just amazed at how incredible it is. I don't want to get into everything about it. Make sure that you are following directions when you are making this, because there are certain procedures that you need to follow in order for it to be safe. But once you know those procedures, everything is fine. And what I find fascinating is when you take water and lye, which are 2 cold ingredients, you put them together, you have a chemical reaction, and it's completely hot, and you see the steam coming up. And it's so incredible with safety to do with your children, because they're able to see that chemistry and see that in action, which is just a wonderful experience. And again, this recipe calls for 3 ingredients, and you can add other ingredients. Again, look into this. You can't just use normal food coloring because that'll have too much water and it might not set up. So definitely research and do your work if you want to do the additives. I am the type of person where I will learn a skill first and then add in the extras, the colors, and could add dried flowers, or I've added oatmeal for the exfoliating effect. There's different things you can do, but I highly recommend starting out simple, learning the basics, teaching your children these basics. And it is a lot of fun, and it's incredible that you can do this with only 3 ingredients. The second thing is another thing that many people are hesitant about, but once you learn it, you will be so excited, and that is bread making. Now, when I'm talking about bread making, I highly recommend learning how to make bread from wheat berries, which means you grind the wheat the day that you make your bread. And the reason we do this is to hold all of the nutrients within the flour. When you have a piece of bread from the store and you have a piece of bread that you just ground the wheat that morning, you will find so much more sustenance, nutrients, and everything that you need. You will be so much more full from one piece of bread. It is essentially like a meal, and it will keep you full. And it is sustenance. When we read in the Bible about, Jesus being the bread of life, it's easy to just think, well, bread isn't our sustenance. Bread isn't what helps us get through the day, but it's a part of it. If it's part of our sandwich or part of our meal or a side with our spaghetti, bread isn't what we are used to living off of. But when you try homemade bread and you begin using that, just a slice of bread with butter or homemade jam for a meal, you'll understand and you'll be able to understand the biblical principle a little more because it is holding all the nutrients and it is sustaining you. Yes, you need more than just bread. We do need other things, other nutrients in our life, but it is night and day. Homemade bread and store bought, traditionally store bought bread, completely night and day. And I will put a recipe in the show notes as well. If you do not have a grain mill, which most people don't, I know people who just use a blender to blend up the wheat berries in their bread, or sometimes they'll make rolls or sandwich bread, or, they'll just do it once in a while, just to hone in on that skill and learn how to do it. And it is just as effective as using a grain mill. Now, a grain mill you'll want if you're going to be doing this on a daily basis, but for educational purposes, you can absolutely use a blender. And the third thing that you can do this winter, which just sounds so good to me right now, is learning how to make bone broth. This has become a trend, a new trend, but it's an old trend that's been revived. Using bone broth means taking the bones from your turkey, from your chicken, from your pig, from whatever you have, and just boiling that down with all of its nutrients until it is completely boiled into a broth, and you can use all those nutrients. Now, when you do this, you can add other things, your onions, garlic, and other additives, healthy, natural ones, to include into your broth. And, if you do a small batch, you can just put them in cans and keep them in your fridge. You don't even have to worry about canning them. Just do enough to last you for a week or two, and you should be absolutely fine. All three of these things are easy that you can do this winter, and they're good skills to have to help you with basics. Teach your children these three things: how to make soap, how to make bread, how to make bone broth, and they will feel like they have it in the bag and they will feel confident, and it's a wonderful opportunity. And before I sign off, I want to mention the 3 flowers that you could begin growing this spring that I said were homeschool friendly, in the sense that there's a lesson, there's something fun to be learned while planting these flowers. So all 3 of these flowers that I have come up with to share with you can help you with telling time. Now, how fun is that? The first one, these flowers are called 4 o'clocks. And they are called 4 o'clocks because the blooms do not open until later in the day. Hence the name 4 o'clock. Around 4 o'clock is when they will bloom. So I know sometimes when there are flowers out in our field that do not bloom all the time, my kids will say, "What's wrong with them?" And then it's a wonderful opportunity to teach them there is nothing wrong with them. And you can even get out the clock and see how close to 4 o'clock do the 4 o'clocks actually bloom. They can be found in pink, red, yellow, white, different colors, and they are so much fun. The second one would be calendula. This one actually surprised me. I grew it this past year, last summer, because I wanted to use it for medicinal purposes, not realizing that it is called calendula because it comes from the Latin word calendulae, which literally translates first day of the month. I saw my cute little orange calendula in my garden, and it was blooming and it was beautiful. I went back a few days later, not blooming. And like my child who asked what's wrong with the flowers and are not blooming, because I was asking the same thing to myself, because all the other flowers in that particular garden were in full bloom. I did not understand why. Went to look it up. I'm still learning. I did not know this, but It is called calendula because it literally translates to first day of the month or beginning of each month, little calendar or little clock. These flowers bloom a majority of the year at the beginning of each month. And I watched it and it was true. October is the height, at least where I live in zone 7, where it was blooming the most. But months before that, it was blooming the first of the month. How awesome is that? And what an incredible learning opportunity to teach this to your children. And then the third plant is called the compass plant. And this is essentially, it's a type of a sunflower. Basically, it's a prairie sunflower. So there's different types of sunflowers that you can grow. Some are a single head on a stalk, and this type is the prairie sunflower that you will see in pictures basically from colonial times where there are multiple heads on one stalk. And this compass plant is called the compass plant because the European settlers of the Great Plains in America coined it this because they used it as a navigational tool because the leaves point directly north and south in the middle of the day. That is incredible. It could be used to find your way if you are lost. I want to have this plant, these seeds on hand anytime in case of an emergency. I know what kind of emergency would I need a compass plant? I don't know, but this is something fun to teach our children. And I absolutely highly recommend getting all 3 of these, the 4 o'clock calendula and the compass plant, and begin planting them in your homeschool this spring. Your kids will love it. Well, I just want to thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Hey Mama Homeschool Show. I hope you enjoyed what we spoke about today, and I want you to know that you can tune in every week for another episode. Next week, you will be able to hear about indoor learning when the weather is bad. And then you will hear math tears, who is crying more, mom or child. And then in February, what about the homeschool dad? Thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the Hey Mama Homeschool Show.